Good morning, everybody. Apologize for the delay. There was a thing on 496. We've got a lot on the agenda today, and so the first thing we're going to do, though, is take attendance. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Chair Breen.
Present.
Representatives Edwards.
Present.
Carter.
Present.
Hope. Here. Arbit. Devendorf.
Present.
Hoskins.
Here.
Cernigal.
Here.
Fink.
Here.
Wenzel.
Here.
Wozniak.
Here.
Outman.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have 12 members present. You do have a quorum.
Thank you. Today we are going to hear testimony on the banned child marriage package. That is House Bills 4293 through 4302. The fertility fraud package, which is House Bills 4178 through 4182. We will also be doing votes on House Bills 4176 and Senate Bill 32. We will have time for anyone who wishes to testify to speak, but we will have a hard stop close to noon, as other people are going to be using this room. But first, also, before we get to testimony for child marriage, I need a motion to approve and adopt the minutes from the previous meeting from Vice Chair Edwards. And I am going to call first up to talk to us, Representative Hope and other people from the public wishing to talk about the child marriage bills. Representative Hope, would you care to kick us off?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name's Kara Hope, and I am State Representative for the 74th House District and obviously a member of the Judiciary Committee. Good morning, colleagues. It's my pleasure today to be here with some activists and some survivors of child marriage. And they are in the best position to tell their story, but before I turn it over to them, I do want to mention a few facts. Child marriage, what does that mean? It means exactly that. Right now in Michigan, 16 and 17-year-olds can get married with parental consent. Children younger than 16 can get married with parental consent and judicial approval. That means that there's no minimum age for marriage in Michigan right now. As shocking as that sounds, and it is shocking, and many people are completely unaware that this is allowed in Michigan, it's not a zombie law. It's not one of those laws that's on the books that no one's using. It's still in use. It's a monster instead of a zombie. So, and just to put this in some context, here in Michigan, since 2000, 5,400 children have been married in the state of Michigan, some as young as 14, and in most of those marriages, it's a very young female being married to an adult male. These bills would ban the practice. It would set 18 as the minimum age for marriage in Michigan. And I will let Frady take it away.
All right. Thank you, Rep. Hope, and thank you all for letting me speak here today. I'm here, Frady Reese, the founder and executive director of Unchained at Last. I'm here, first of all, as a survivor of a forced marriage. I'm here also as an advocate. We at Unchained are on the front lines helping individuals in Michigan and across the U.S. to escape forced marriages. And I'm here as an expert. My research and writing on forced and child marriage have been published in the New York Times, Washington Post, Journal of Adolescent Health, and elsewhere. As Rep. Hope was saying, the current loopholes in the marriage age law are extremely dangerous here in Michigan. We're hoping that we can pass the pending bill package and close these loopholes. Parental consent for those 16 and 17-year-olds is nothing more than a signature on the marriage license application. We at Unchained have worked with girls who showed up at the clerk's office sobbing openly, begging for help. There is nothing that those girls can do, nothing that the clerks can do in that situation to stop the marriage. And with the judicial review process that's in place for those 15 and younger with no minimum age specified, there are no criteria that a judge is required to consider before approving a child marriage petition, other than the fact that a parent requested it. So if a parent were forcing their own child to marry, which is the most likely scenario that we see at Unchained, there is, again, like with the parental consent, There is no real recourse for that child and no real input required from them at all. Two other dangerous aspects of the current law as written that I want to quickly go over. First of all, we're completely undermining our statutory rape laws. Sex with a child under the age of 16 is considered felony rape here in Michigan. It is punishable by up to 20 years in prison. But marriage to a child under the age of 16 is completely legal. And once that marriage license is issued, a perpetrator cannot be prosecuted solely because their spouse is underage. So we're effectively giving get-out-of-jail-free cards to child rapists when we issue a marriage license to somebody under the age of 16 who's not even old enough to consent to sex, and that is happening in Michigan. Parents and judges are signing off on this. Another dangerous aspect of the current law as written is once a child is married, they are automatically emancipated, regardless of their age, regardless of their situation. They are automatically emancipated and likely lose their parents' financial support. That is terrible public policy. Typically, because we know what a big deal emancipation is, that it means that a child loses their parents' financial support, before a child here in Michigan can be emancipated, we A, make them wait until they're age 16, and B, make them show a court that they are financially and emotionally independent. Nobody looks at any of that when we automatically emancipate children just because a parent signed a form and entered them into marriage. What this does is it forces a lot of children to become financially dependent on their spouse, which is a risk factor for domestic violence and one of the main reasons domestic violence survivors give for why they stayed in an abusive relationship. It also is a driver of teen homelessness. 70 to 80% of marriages before 18 end in divorce. If that child doesn't have parents to go back home to after the marriage ends, what happens to them? We have seen some of them end up on the streets. But perhaps most upsettingly, this automatic emancipation upon marriage also gives a really powerful incentive for parents to force their own child to marry. Because only one parent has to sign the form, what we have seen is parents, without the other parent's knowledge, entering a child into marriage so that they're automatically emancipated, and then the parent can get out of a child support obligation or a child custody battle that was costing them a lot of money in legal fees. The current laws are making this entirely too easy. I also want to talk about why it is so important to make the marriage age 18 no exceptions, not to have an exception even for emancipated minors, those who've already gone through that process to become emancipated. The reason that we have emancipation is for teens who for some reason cannot be reunited with their parents. And what we have done is we have said if you can show a court that you're financially and emotionally independent, we are going to give you some limited rights of adulthood so that you can navigate the world independently until you turn 18 and get the full rights of adulthood. An emancipated minor is not an adult. That's really important. They get only limited rights. They can contract, they can sue and be sued, but they still cannot engage in acts that are limited by age. For example, they still cannot buy alcohol, cigarettes, go to a tanning salon. So, when we have listed the specific enumerated rights that we give to emancipated teens for this specific reason. A, marriage is not necessary. Nobody needs marriage to navigate the world independently. But also, the same way we don't let them we wouldn't let them contract to buy cigarettes or to buy alcohol because those are limited by age and they're dangerous for somebody who's not 18. And you'll hear soon about why marriage before 18 is so dangerous. It also makes sense that even an emancipated minor, A, it's not necessary for them to marry or to have the so-called right to marry, which is a human rights abuse, by the way, not a right, but also because like we also say they can contract to buy cigarettes, alcohol, other things that are dangerous for them at that age, it makes entire sense for us to say the same thing about marriage. It's dangerous before 18. You have the right to contract for things that you need to navigate the world independently, but you don't need that specific so-called right, which is actually a human rights abuse. The bill package before you today is that rare legislation that costs nothing. It harms no one except child rapists, and it ends a human rights abuse. Please support. And I'll turn it over to Michelle to talk about why child marriage is so dangerous.
Thank you, Frady. Hi. Thank you, Chair, Vice Chairs, committee members, for allowing me this opportunity to testify on behalf of this important legislation. I'm Michelle Hanash. I'm Director of Policy and Women's Programs at the AHA Foundation. We are a nonprofit working to end harmful practices in Michigan and the U.S., just like child marriage. We also operate a helpline for those fleeing these really dangerous situations, including minors. So we also have that experience as well. So as Frady was mentioning, the only problem with child marriage in Michigan isn't just the process we use to enter children into marriage. The problem is that child marriage is also inherently dangerous. And what that means, there's three main reasons why it's inherently dangerous. The first is that it is a legal trap. For children under the age of 18, they cannot just simply leave home if a parent is planning a forced marriage for them. They could be sent to county jail. They could be sent to juvenile detention. They don't have that right. And in fact, if advocates like us try to help minors who are fleeing, we can be charged with a misdemeanor. We can spend a year in jail and pay a fine of $500. And even if those minors were able to leave home, where would they go? They can't even enter a women's shelter because those staff members could also be charged criminally for harboring a juvenile runaway. So they don't have the ability to leave home. They don't have a safe place to go. You might also recognize that a minor in this situation would have very complex legal needs. Unfortunately, because they are minors, they would have extreme difficulty retaining an attorney because contracts with minors are voidable. They can't even file their own legal actions independently. And in fact, they cannot even file for their own annulment independently, causing enhanced difficulties. So the first issue, as I mentioned, it is completely a legal trap. And while when they're married, they do get some limited rights of adulthood, as you heard, there's a couple problems there. First, those rights are unclear. We don't even know if they can enter a women's shelter. Secondly, they are limited, as you heard. They do not have the full rights of adulthood. And third, those rights come too late. They come after that child has already been potentially forced to marry. And that means they would have already endured that trauma. They would have already been raped on their wedding night, every night thereafter, and set up for a life of sexual and domestic servitude. And you cannot simply undo that trauma by stamping emancipated across a girl's forehead. And in fact, when girls reach out for help, they often think death is a better option than being forced to be subjected to that. And that leads us to our second point, why child marriage is inherently dangerous, because of the lifelong and devastating repercussions. We know child marriage destroys nearly every aspect of a girl's life here in the US. It destroys her opportunities for economic opportunities, for health, for education. We know she's more likely to be subjected to intimate partner violence, sexual violence, physical abuse. So it's extremely dangerous. And in fact, it's so harmful that our own US State Department calls marriage before 18 a human rights abuse. So that's a very disturbing aspect of why child marriage is in fact inherently dangerous. Third, we heard child marriage violates our own statutory rape laws. So instead of handing out jail sentences for adults who would like to have sex with children 15 and younger, we're handing them a marriage certificate. And I wish I could say that this was just a one-off event happening in Michigan, but as you heard, we know the data says that if you look at just Michigan, and this is based on child marriage certificate data that Unchained at Last was able to retrieve from the Michigan Department of Health, we know just in Michigan between 2000 and 2001, 5,426 children were married in Michigan as young as 14. 95% of those children were girls wed to adult men, an average 4.3 years older than them, and 12 of those marriages involved a minor under the age of 16, meaning it should have been a sex crime, but those perpetrators were given a marriage certificate instead of a jail sentence. And let me finish by saying just in 2021 alone, 39 children were entered into marriage when there was legislation pending here in Michigan that would have ended child marriage. We cannot continue to wait for legislation to pass while more children and more girls are being abused. It's time now to end child marriage in Michigan. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Before we go to the next witness, I'm going to ask that my colleagues hold their questions until the witnesses have testified. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Denise Sylvester. As a product of Michigan Public Schools, it's an honor and privilege to be here today, so thank you. I'm a member of Zonta International. It's a nonpartisan organization that strives to build a better world for women and girls through service and advocacy. I'm the advocacy chair for Zonta International District 15, which includes clubs throughout Michigan and part of Canada. In this capacity, I lead the advocacy efforts for all clubs. Ending child marriage is an important issue for our members, your constituents. Ending child marriage is a national movement. So far, 8 states have ended all marriage before 18 with no exceptions. Those states are Delaware, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Rhode Island, New York, Massachusetts, and just recently, Vermont. And even more so recently, the Connecticut House passed legislation to set the marriage age at 18 with no exceptions, making this state very close to becoming the 9th state to end child marriage in the United States. Michigan cannot be left behind, and instead can be a leader in this national movement. This legislation is supported by the Michigan Coalition to End Child Marriage, of which Zonta is a member. It's led by Unchained at Last, which Frady Reese is the founder and leader of that organization. The coalition is comprised of survivors of child marriage and nearly 50 organizations that represent thousands of Michiganders. Not only is this a national movement, but this is a global movement as well. Under the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, 193 countries have agreed to end child marriage by the year 2030. The United States State Department, as Michelle said, considers marriage under 18 a human rights abuse. I want to reiterate that this legislation harms no one. It costs nothing and it ends a human rights abuse. It impacts real people, real lives. And so I'm going to turn it over to Nina Van Horn, who has some personal experiences with this. Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for giving me time today to talk about this very important issue as it does affect me personally. The wedding dress. There are 3,426 names on this dress so far. I still have another 2,002 names to add to this dress, and that is just the victims we know between 2000 and 2021. Two of the names on here are very personal to me, and I'm going to get to their stories. But just as a side note before I read those, if all 5,426 girls were here today, and there are some boys in that too, were here today to give 2 minutes of testimony each, it would take 180 hours. You, of course, don't have that kind of time. So I'm going to read you 2 statements that were prepared and sent in. These women were not able to be here today. They were actually here at the Capitol last week during our chain-in. And the first one is Gina Broly from Wyoming, Michigan. My name is Gina Broly, and I'm a resident of Wyoming, Michigan. I met my boyfriend when I was 12 years old, walking home from school. He offered me a ride on his moped. He was 16 at the time, and we started dating after that. I got pregnant at 13 and thought I had to get married. My daughter was 6 months old when we wed. I was 14, he was 18. While he had all the rights of adulthood, I had extremely limited rights, but didn't even know what they were. My dad was against the marriage. He said I was too young. However, my mother agreed. She was the one to go to the Ingham County Courthouse right here in Lansing and have the judge sign the paperwork. I never even saw the judge. She just handled all of it. Everything was wonderful in our relationship while dating and after I had our daughter. I loved his family and they loved me. His mother was especially kind. However, as soon as we were married, things changed. He became physically, mentally, and emotionally abusive. He treated me like property. If he wanted to have sex at a family party, he would bring me into the bathroom. Fighting back wasn't an option. I tried once and ended up with a broken nose. After that, I knew better. He discouraged me from continuing my education. I just made it into the 10th grade before dropping out. I did eventually get my GED. I had to take my 2 toddlers with me to class to accomplish this. Trying to wrangle 2 small children who did not want to be there was extremely difficult. Throughout the marriage, I tried to find resources to leave, but was unsuccessful. When I was 17, I went to legal aid to help filing for a divorce. I needed them to take my case because I had no financial resources. They denied me twice. Finally, 6 years into the marriage, it got so bad that at one point he held a gun to my head in front of our daughter. She had to run to the neighbor's house screaming, "Dad is going to shoot my mom." I didn't report because I couldn't work and I needed him to support me and the kids financially. Eventually, he also raped me. This time I went to file a report, but the district attorney told me I couldn't file a case for rape against him because we were married and he was my husband. After that, I wouldn't report anything again. However, I knew I needed to leave no matter what. It was also when legal aid finally took my case and I was able to file for divorce, now that I was 20 years old. We divorced for a year, but he still wouldn't let me go. Within a year, we were back together as a family, but this time without a marriage license keeping me there. When it got bad again a few years later, I was able to just leave. This time it was much easier and it was for good. However, it was not the last I would encounter him. 10 years later, after the death of a man I was dating, he came around again. He knew the ins and outs of my mom's home where I was staying. He managed to get into the house and raped me again. The effects of being married as a child have been lifelong. It was 18 years before I was really free from his abuse. Even though it was something I thought I wanted at the time, I wish there had been protections in place to prevent me and my family from being able to make this decision. I didn't get to finish my childhood or pursue the life I wanted. Please, vote to end all marriages before 18 with no exceptions. Thank you, Gina Browley. Gina is a good friend of mine. She lives across the street from my children's high school. The next statement I have is from Arlene Nyhoff. My name is Arlene Nyhoff, and I've been a resident of Michigan my whole life. I am writing this to share my experience being married as a child. 6 weeks after I turned 16, my 22-year-old husband convinced me to forge my mother's signature and marry him while I was a resident of West Olive, Michigan. The abuse started almost immediately. The first year, I tried to leave about once a month. However, as a minor, there was nowhere for me to go and no resources available to me. I had no access to our finances. I could not get a bank account in my own name. I was not able to buy or lease a car. I could not legally rent a hotel room for even one night. I was turned away. I could not go to a women's shelter, and I could not rent an apartment. I could not get any legal help to escape because a minor cannot obtain a lawyer or file a lawsuit, especially at that time. 3 months later, I was pregnant with the first of 4 children. Being married and pregnant, I dropped out of West Ottawa High School in the 10th grade. This limited my ability to obtain a job that would sustain me and my children independent of my abusive husband. I was groomed as a child. Then my adult spouse essentially became my parent. He made me behave the way he wanted. He forced me to obey him. There were many facets of my child marriage which negatively affected my proper emotional and educational growth. As a teen bride, I experienced extreme psychological, sexual, and physical abuse. I fully endorse a clean bill ending all child marriage without exceptions, not only for the sake of what I experienced, but for the sake of my children's experience and the safety and needed protection of my grandchildren. Children should be protected from being allowed to go through what I went through. Please vote to end this abuse. Thank you, Arlene Nyhoff. My name is Nina Van Hart, and I am Arlene's daughter. I am also a lifelong resident of Michigan. I lived as a witness to the abuse my mother endured. This had detrimental effects on me and my siblings that continue to today. Her name is one of the 5,428 names that are going to go on this dress. Gina is also on here. My own grooming to be a teen bride started when I was 10 or 11 years old. It was during these years my father prepared me to accept whatever spouse he chose for me. He started looking for a husband for me in earnest when I turned 16. Had he been successful in his search earlier, I would have been married as a child bride. As it was, was forced into a marriage at 19 years old, in this very dress, to a man he chose. The ceremony took place right at Dimnett Chapel in Holland, Michigan. And I suffered the same abuses as my mother. My education stopped. My options for employment were limited to what he would allow me to do from home between taking care of the children. And he took all of the finances. I wasn't allowed to leave the house without permission. He took my car away until after I got pregnant. He chose when we had sex and when that pregnancy happened, and the two after that. In addition to the sexual abuse, I was subjected to verbal and emotional abuse as well. When my own daughters were just 10 and 7 years old, their father and grandfather took them to lunch and informed them that their spouses would be chosen for them, and like my mother and I, they would be married young. I couldn't allow this cycle to continue. I left, and the state of Michigan granted me the first annulment based on my marriage being a forced marriage. It is legally recognized as such. Even as an adult, 31 years old, with all the legal rights of adulthood, it was extremely difficult to find help, to stay out. My oldest daughter is now 19 and she is safe, graduating next week from high school. My youngest daughter is 16 and she is still at risk. So is my 14-year-old son. Because only one parent's signature is needed to marry them off, if their father chose, he could do that during their visitation next weekend. And there is nothing I could do to stop it. But what would it also stop? His child support and any custody issues. Being groomed, manipulated, forced, or trafficked into marriage would deprive my daughter, Evelyn, of the freedoms she's supposed to enjoy as a citizen. How could she enjoy her right to life if she is more likely to be controlled, abused, raped, and impregnated against her will? How is she supposed to exercise liberty when she wouldn't be able to get a job, a car, a bank account without the consent of her spouse or another adult? How would she pursue happiness if being a child bride results in a higher chance of suffering from mental illness, health problems, poverty, and loss of education? The only legal protection my daughter Evelyn would have against this human rights abuse is a bill that passes and makes 18 no exceptions, the legal age to marry in Michigan. So please, I beg you to support this bill for my family and so that I do not have to add another name to this dress. Thank you.
And we do have another survivor on Zoom, Courtney Kosnick.
Thank you. Courtney, are you with us?
Great. I am now unmuted so I can speak. My name is Courtney Kosnick. I'm a lifelong Michigan resident. I'm here today as a survivor of child marriage. 30 years ago this month, in 1993, I was a 16-year-old junior in high school. I had several full-ride scholarships for pre-med, which was my dream, to become a doctor. I met a man at a coffee house in Ferndale who groomed me in a very short period of time to be his wife. This man was 28 years old, 12 years older than me. I was too young to fully understand the consequences of my actions, and I was not given the opportunity to make an informed decision when he and my mother went to the Oakland County Courthouse to sign my marriage license. My childhood was abruptly cut short, and my dreams and aspirations were swept aside. I finished my 11th grade year on a Friday, and on Saturday I was married off. My husband, from that moment on, controlled every aspect of my life until the day that I escaped, which took me 23 years. His physical, emotional, and sexual abuse began on my wedding night. What you may not realize, though the others have mentioned this, I could not file for divorce under the age of 18. I tried within a month of my marriage and was turned away by every lawyer I contacted. I could not go to a domestic abuse shelter. I tried and was turned away. I was told to go back home. When I said that wasn't an option, I was told to go to my parents. Again, that was not an option. I had no money in my name. I could not work. Under our state laws, I had to have a work permit, which must be signed by my guardian, who was my husband. I tried every possible way to get out and was told to just deal with the choices I had made. I stayed, I worked, I did as I was told, and I shut up because that way I didn't get hit. During this time, I finished my senior year of high school. I was fortunate that way. But those full ride scholarships that I had been assured by my husband I would be able to go to were taken away. He insisted that I start working full time as soon as I finished high school. And that is where my education ended. He told me after I took care of our children, I had my first child shortly after my senior year, that after I took care of the children, the house, and my job, then I was free to go to college. It took me until I was 35 years old to attain my associate's degree. 23 years into this marriage at the age of 40, I finally had the support of friends and professionals to help get me out of this marriage. Keep in mind that even at 40, I had nothing in my name. The business that I worked in every day was in his name. Our home was in his name. The bank accounts were in his name. Every dime that I earned, he controlled. I was not allowed to spend any of our family finances without permission. First, he monitored every email account, every social media account, every bank transaction, every credit card transaction, to the point that there was a tracker on my phone. And if it took me too long to get from my house to my office or the reverse trip, I was getting a phone call to figure out what I was doing. I lost precious years of my life to a situation that should have never been allowed to occur in the first place. I am, as the other survivors here today are, the face of child trafficking that is fully sanctioned by our state. Let me say that again. We are being trafficked as children to be married to adult men. Despite the immense harm that child marriage causes, it remains legal in 42 out of our 50 states. It's time to stand up and never allow an adult to marry a child or to allow any child to marry in our state any longer. The power dynamic that's created when a child marries an adult is permanent. That child, even once they become an adult, is never on equal footing in that relationship. That's usually not what the men want. There's a reason they marry a child. I did not intend to be an advocate. When I walked away from my husband, I wanted to go away and raise my 4 children and live my life and work. It just so happened that a year after my divorce, I discovered my ex-husband attempting to set my 15-year-old daughter up with a 40-year-old man that he knew. It was then that I realized he was grooming her to be married off at 16 when it would only be required that he sign the marriage license. This was a way for him to punish me for leaving. My children are everything to me, and he knew that taking her away from me would hurt. Therefore, this was the plan he had set in motion. I fortunately was able to discover it and stop this from happening. I then went and was successful in getting full physical and legal custody of my children to where I did not have to send my children to him on a weekend visit where he could have married them off. Under the law that allows one parent to sign off on a marriage license, these children are very much in danger. This young lady had plans and aspirations that it was very important for me to protect. Today, that young lady's 19 years old. She has finished high school and she is in her first year at the Naval Academy, representing our state as a future officer in the military. She got to live out her dreams because I happened, by the grace of God, to find his plan out. But we really need these bills to pass, the clean bills that are in front of you today, so that we don't have to take luck. We don't have to be fortunate to find something out and that our girls then are fully protected. I'm calling on the Michigan legislature to take action now. Outlaw child marriage once and for all, 18, no exception. Every child in our state deserves the right to grow up safe, healthy, and free of all that child marriage undermines. By passing these bills, Michigan can stand for the rights of children and send a powerful message that our girls are not for sale. And the practice of child marriage will no longer be tolerated in our state. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Thank you for your votes. I do look forward to the day that all children in our state are safe from adult predators.
I want to thank all of you for this testimony today. I know it was very difficult for some of you, and I would like to say that I'm grateful that you've been able to end these abusive relationships, but it's clear that sometimes even after the marriage ends, the abuse is ongoing. So thank you. I know this was very, very difficult. We do have some questions. I'm going to start with my own, though. There are definitely concerns about marriages that are currently in place and whether or not this legislation, as far as I understand it, it will not end the marriages that are currently in place that could cause some extraordinary upheaval for a lot of these women. And it appears 95% of the children involved here are women. And so to end those marriage contracts would cause major financial repercussions, issues with child support, child care, possibly further abuse. I would like to say, what, if any, plans are there to help these women that are currently in child marriages, and just verify that my understanding is correct, that none of these bills will end any marriages that are currently in place?
That's correct. There would be constitutional problems with applying this retroactively, but I'll let Frady speak to the issue of girls who are currently in these abusive relationships and what plans, if any, there are for legislation.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you. And that's a really good question. I appreciate that. So yes, as Rep. Pope said, this legislation is only prospective. We would never want to harm the people we're trying to help by creating the kind of chaos and upheaval that you described. In terms of those who are already in these marriages, it's a heartbreaking situation that I'm open to discussing possible remedies. What I can say is if we ended child marriage today in Michigan, then within a few years we would no longer have any minors who are still in a marriage. But certainly if you wanted to talk about additional legislation beyond this, let's not touch this legislation. I don't want to amend this in any way. We want clean legislation to stop this from happening. And we at Unchained and our allies, AHA Foundation and others, are direct service providers here to help those who reach out for help. But additional legislation, if there's anything you want to talk about, we're happy to discuss.
Thank you. Representative Fink.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks everyone for being here and testifying. I realize that in some cases in particular that it's difficult testimony to give, so I appreciate you being willing to come and do that. I was a sponsor of, I guess, a version of one of these bills last term, certainly in terms of concept, preventing situations where we're putting young people at risk. It's an obligation of the state to be cognizant of that and try to avoid it. So as far as the general concept goes, and I've had some discussions with folks here already, that's certainly where I'm starting from. I do have some questions about some of the details, and in fact, I kind of wonder if there at least could be, I mean, this is a major public policy change, so it's not a surprise that there are complexities that at least I didn't think of right away. So like just one example would be, if there's still going to be 41 states, if Michigan passes exactly this package, if there's still going to be 41 states where some version of what we're calling child marriage is legal, and I suppose it's probably different in different places. There are ages 14, 16, 17, I don't know. But so say a couple of 17-year-olds get married, or okay, make it a little more predatory. It's a 17-year-old and somebody 10 years older or more. And then that couple moves to Michigan. If we adopt, for instance, I think it'd be House Bill 40. Where's the one about renting rooms? 4298, is that it? Okay, $42.99. Yeah. You made the point that like a person trapped in a situation like this might not even be able to get a hotel room. Well, if we adopt the rest of the main packages of the bill, then our state wouldn't be the one producing these marriages. But if another state is, might there actually be some detrimental effect in saying that that person, for instance, could no longer use her marriage licenses? I mean, not that we carry our marriage licenses around, but again, just like the fact that she's married and probably therefore emancipated by operation of law in that other state. Don't you want that person to be able to begin to be more independent even prior to a divorce and therefore be able to do something like rent a hotel room? Do you follow my question and kind of where my concern's coming from?
Yeah, and I appreciate that question, and I appreciate your thoughtful approach to this. And you're right, this is a big public policy change that should have been done decades ago. But yes, it is a big deal, and I appreciate the close look that you're taking at it. In answer to your question, first of all, in a lot of states, you're not automatically emancipated once you're married. I haven't done a count of how many states automatically emancipate and how many do not, so I can't say which one is most. But it's definitely not all states. But also, the limited rights that come with automatic emancipation, what we have found is that they are never sufficient for a child marriage survivor to actually be able to get away. So the problems that an emancipated minor would have in Michigan in terms of domestic violence shelter taking them in, for example, in terms of even when they do have the rights, just convincing the adults around them that they have the rights. You know, if you have an apartment to rent out, are you going to want to rent to the emancipated 16-year-old, or are you going to want to rent to a full adult? So what I'm saying is that little piece of not being able to get a hotel room, that's not going to be what trips up that child from that getting away from that other marriage.
I understand that practically it might not be a huge effect. And if it was just one state, though, where you're emancipated by operation of law if you're married, and that's the situation a person like that is in, the effect that I mean, I guess this would be my question. In what sense does that particular piece really drive this issue forward? Because if Michigan is no longer the state issuing the license, it's not hampering the independence of this person. You know, we're not doing that ourselves as a state if we don't issue those licenses any longer. But if the person gets it in another state, we're furthering the dependence that person has on, you know, in this hypothetical, you know, a controlling spouse who it's difficult to separate from. And I guess I'm saying, don't we want to think about ways to allow that 17-year-old or 16-year-old or whatever to live more independently? I mean, I understand your point about emancipation, although I actually, after we spoke, I looked at the law, and really the way our law works in Michigan is you're emancipated. Once you're emancipated, you have all the rights of adulthood with a small set of exceptions. Really, the default is you have all the rights of adulthood, and that's why there are these things like you can rent a room to a minor. But I'm just saying, my point is, shouldn't we be thinking about ways to actually make independence easier if you're a person who is married somewhere else and then winds up in Michigan? I mean, it seems to me like that would be the goal, because otherwise we're increasing the legal dependence that person has to have. You follow my point?
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. But again, I'm going to say that the renting a hotel room, we at Unchained have been working for 12 years to help individuals escape forced marriages. We've worked with more than 900 individuals across the United States. And I can think of one occasion where we tried to get a hotel room to help a survivor escape. So that particular piece is not going to be a piece that's going to be a big problem. I can tell you additionally that we are going, the allies, the advocates you're seeing here today, we're not only here in Michigan, but we're going state by state. We're the ones who helped end child marriage in those 8 states, and we're going state by state, and eventually there will be no child marriage in any state in the U.S. But certainly, if you wanted to write additional legislation, and again, keeping this legislation intact, but if you wanted to write additional legislation to say if you've already been married and you've already been subjected to this human rights abuse, whether it was in Michigan or in another state, we want to give you some additional rights to help you escape potentially, then let's talk about that. But, and I can tell you, for example, Massachusetts took an approach like that. They ended all marriage before 18, and then they also said, and if you've already been married before 18, we're going to give you the right to file for divorce. We're going to give you the right, some limited rights. I don't know how effective that is, because before 18 in Massachusetts, you can't even leave home and you can't retain an attorney. So I don't know how you could file for divorce if you can't retain an attorney. it's so hard. It's really so hard to navigate around the disabilities of non-age. But certainly, if you want to write additional legislation, keeping this intact for additional supports, then absolutely, let's talk about that. But don't let that hold us up, please.
Thank you. Before I turn to Representative Johnson, I will say that I think we will need to address whether or not Michigan will recognize underage marriages that occur in other states. That is a very, very complicated issue, and I don't think that can be addressed within this package, but I do want to put that on everybody's radar that that might be the next step. Representative Johnson?
Thank you, Chair Breen. Thank you so much for your courage to live through what you did, to share this. I've been a counselor off and on for 30 years in crisis pregnancy situations, and I just admire all that you've come through and out of, and my heart breaks for all the stories that your dress represents. And I want to share some concerns. This is the tip of the iceberg. This is a huge iceberg. We have cultural problems that are tremendous. In addition to forced marriage, we have forced abortions. We have forced medical procedures. We have all sorts of forced things, and there's a really big difference between teenagers who want to run off with their boyfriends or girlfriends, and the parents are trying to protect them from it too. You know, it goes both ways, as you know. You're trying to protect your children, and in every divorce situation or where people were never married, you've got kids going back and forth, and the confusion is tremendous in our culture. I share your well-researched and well-thought-out concerns. With proper amendments, I mean additional safeguards, additional guardrails, I would be in favor of this. But this is my concern. The stories you've shared are also the stories of especially women, but some men, in their 20s and 30s. And they can't seem to find help to break out of horribly abusive situations. Human trafficking is all over the place, whether it's children or adults. We have pedophilia, rape. All of these are such horrific, awful abuses that crush and destroy people's lives, as you know, and some never get out of the cycle, and they pass it on if they have children. My biggest concern is we're going to say 18 years old, done, good, we're all set. And it will not solve the problem of abuse, mental illness, cycles of deviant behavior perpetuated. There has to be a lot more than just an age addressed here. And with the proper amendments, I would be in favor of this. But how do you feel about that? 16 years old is the standard for sexual consent in this state. Whether I agree with that or not, that is the law. Statutory rape is 16 years old. Do you feel that these should be matched up so that we have similar ages? It's medical protocol in the state of Michigan. I completely disagree with it, and there is no law supporting it, but it is becoming medical protocol that a 12-year-old can make their own medical decisions. They push the parents out of the room.
Representative, I am so sorry. We are short on time. Could you just wrap up your question succinctly? We will have an opportunity to discuss these bills again next week.
Thank you. Would you be in favor of considering more legislation tie-barred with this to kind of tighten that up so we're consistent across the board?
Well, thank you for your question. So first of all, you're absolutely right that this legislation would not end domestic violence. It would not end pedophilia. It would not end mental illness. It would not also end a lot of horrific, terrible, heartbreaking situations that happen here in Michigan and elsewhere. The intent of this bill is to end child marriage, and that's what this bill would do very, very effectively in a very simple way, just eliminating marriage before age 18. It's very simple legislation. In terms of matching the age of marriage to the age of consent to sex, those are two very different things. Marriage is a contract, and it's a pretty big deal to enter marriage, and children cannot consent to a marriage right now in Michigan. A parent and or a judge consents for them, as opposed to sex, which is a sexual encounter or sexual relationship is not a contract. So having the rights of adulthood are crucial for entering into a contract. They're not crucial for having sex, regardless of whether one feels that sex outside of marriage is appropriate. That's a personal decision. So, so I see no reason that those should be matched. You want to see something?
Yes, and with all due respect, I don't think it's a good idea for us to put this issue on pause until we solve mental health, until we solve pedophilia, until we solve domestic violence, because those issues have been with us since forever, the dawn of time. I don't think kids in Michigan should have to wait.
Thank you. Representative Devendorf, quickly, if you don't mind.
They said that at the last committee. So I appreciate Representative Johnson recognizing that we are going to require a multi-layered solution, because we do, in order to develop really good holistic public policy. However, I don't advocate for the solutions being proposed. I hope we will recognize that that some folks having some rights doesn't mean that they are recognized as being within a community. So giving our juveniles just some rights upon being emancipated truly does not make them adults. They are not enjoying all of the full benefits of being an adult. They are not an adult. Giving some rights and not all rights with a designated category, in fact, makes very clear that somebody is considered not part of that category. I would ask that we are looking at legislation that relates to those folks that want to get out of these marriages and that were forced into the marriages, perhaps introducing legislation that makes it easy for a survivor of child marriage who has been forced into a marriage to easily petition the court to leave and be granted a right to end the marriage if they proceed this legislation. And in addition, that with all displaced youth that may be emancipated, whether that has to do with family rejection or forced child marriage, that we consider, because they are still juveniles and they are not yet adults and will struggle with all of those obstacles, offering that they can petition for the child support that would otherwise be paid from the parents if they can show that they were forced into the marriage or something along those lines. We do need to find a way, and I would love to know if you have a suggestion to care for those folks that need to get out of those marriages and are not yet adults, and ideally make parents responsible for what has happened.
Yeah, I mean, you're raising some really good, I think, a good starting point for additional legislation that would provide some sort of relief for those few years until all of those who have already been subjected to this human rights abuse under current Michigan law, until they age out, just to give them some relief. I would love to work with you on legislation like that. Again, I can't say it enough, as long as we're not using that to hold up, because what we really need to do is end it today. No more girls on Nina's gown.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We will continue this discussion next week. Thank you for your testimony, and to those that have brought up concerns, I encourage you to reach out to the bill sponsors. Before we move on to testimony regarding fertility fraud, we are going to take some votes. Before I do that, though, I'm going to read in some cards very quickly. Supporting House Bills 4293 through 4302, but not wishing to speak, Scott Kempa from the Michigan State Medical Society. Megan Reynolds from the Michigan Poverty Law Program and Family Law Program. Dwayne Brejak from National Association of Social Workers. Ann Coonan from the Michigan League for Public Policy. Mary Pollock from the American Association of University Women. Mary Pollock also from the Michigan National Organization for Women. And Heath Lowry from the Michigan Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence. Also, We have Susie Sherman Hall from the State Public Affairs Committee for the Michigan State Council of Junior Leagues supporting the bills. Denise Jacob, RN, also supporting the bills. Jess Averill from the Michigan Domestic and Sexual Violence Prevention and Treatment Board. They support House Bills 4293, 4294, 4295, and are neutral on 4301. And Kathy Lucas supporting bills 4293 for 4302. Okay. We are now moving to House Bill 4176. I have an H3 substitute before the committee. This substitute mirrors the provisions in SB 32 to clarify when an officer does not have to reimburse the agency for training costs. I will take a motion from Representative Arbit to adopt the sub H3 for House Bill 4176. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter.
Yes.
Hope.
Yes.
Arbit.
Aye.
Devendorf.
Aye.
Hoskins.
Aye.
Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
Yes.
Wenzel.
Yes.
Wozniak.
Yes.
Outman.
Yes.
Johnson.
Yes.
Madam Chair, you have 13 yeas, 0 nays, 0 passed. The substitute is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I will now take a motion from Representative Tyrone Carter to report House Bill 4176 as sub H3 with recommendation. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter.
Yes.
Hope.
Yes.
Arbit.
Aye.
Devendorf.
Aye.
Hoskins.
Yes.
Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
Yes.
Wenzel.
Yes.
Wozniak.
Yes.
Outman.
Yes.
Johnson.
Yes.
Madam Chair, you have 13 yeas, 0 nays, 0 passed. House Bill 4176 is reported with recommendation as substitute H3.
Thank you. I have H1 substitute for Senate Bill 32 before the committee. I will take a motion from Representative Hope to adopt the H1 sub for SB 32. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter.
Yes.
Hope.
Yes.
Arbit.
Aye.
Devendorf.
Aye.
Hoskins.
Yes.
Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
Yes.
Wenzel.
Yes.
Wozniak.
Yes.
Outman.
Yes.
Johnson.
Yes.
Madam Chair, you have 13 yeas, 0 nays, 0 passed. Substitute is adopted.
Thank you. I will now take a motion to report SB 32, H1 sub, with recommendation from Representative Hoskins. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter.
Yes.
Hope.
Yes.
Arbit.
Aye.
Devendorf.
Yes.
Hoskins.
Yes.
Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
Yes.
Wenzel.
Yes.
Wozniak.
Yes.
Outman.
Yes.
Johnson.
Yes.
Madam Chair, you have 13 yeas, 0 nays, 0 passed. Senate Bill 32 is reported with recommendation as substitute H1.
Thank you. I will also note that we have cards from Harrisana Richards from the Michigan Municipal League supporting both of those bills, HB 4176 and SB 32, but not wishing to speak. We are now going to move to the fertility fraud bills, and the committee will go at ease.
That one. The committee will come back to order.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am here with my colleagues John Roth and Samantha Steckloff to discuss House Bills 4178. These are bills that we took up last term. They sailed through fairly easily in both Judiciary and Health Policy, and they got out of the Senate Health. Yeah, they got out of the House pretty easily and through the Senate committee, but they never made it all the way to the finish line. I'm going to let Representative Roth give a better overview of the package. I'm just going to speak very briefly on my bill, which is very simply to say that if you've been convicted of a crime under these bills, that the Laura, basically you are going to have a disciplinary hearing. No free passes. But I will let Representative Roth take it away.
Thank you, Chairman Breen. I want to thank everybody here at the committee and thank my colleagues, Chair Breen, Representative Steckloff, Representative Whitsett, St. Germain, and myself for this package. This is not what I came to Lansing for last year, but it came to my attention by one of my constituents that this had happened. And so we got together and said we should probably put a few guardrails on this kind of situation. So it was 3 years ago when the constituent came to my office, and told me her story, and she's going to share that with you today. And probably like many of you today, you're going to be stunned. You're going to be stunned that this activity wasn't illegal, and it still isn't illegal today unless we put these guardrails on. It's fertility fraud. When a woman goes into a clinic to get services, she's going to expect to get the services that she asked for or requested, and not some other service. So we all agreed that this is about patience. This is also to make sure that donors to these services are also telling the truth. There is no truth in donor services today. I actually have a representative in our caucus today that tried to get fertility services, and she picked out the Harvard graduate. Well, there is no guarantee that that was a Harvard graduate because of the laws today. So we take this very seriously, and it's flat wrong. Ladies that want to get have fertility services should get what exactly they're asking for. So we also want to make sure that they know the family history, so that they have the right to know that. And then they need to know that when they have been deceived or misled, there will be consequences for those that did that fraud. So here today, ask for your support with my colleagues. And we do have, I believe, Jamie is on Zoom, I believe. I give her an immense amount of credit. She's been very brave to tell her story. She never shied from the press if they ask her questions. There she is, Miss Jamie Hall. How are you today?
Doing well, thank you.
Jamie, before you get started, and to my colleagues, because we are very short on time, if we need to, we will continue this discussion next week. But with that, Jamie, take it away.
All right, well, first of all, thank you, all of you, for listening to my story, and I'm hoping that you have looked over these bills. Personally, I'd like to say I find it appropriate that this is being brought in front of you the week of Mother's Day, because right now, spiritually, my mom's right here with me. So I'm not just talking to you alone. I'm talking to you for my mother and for a lot of other mothers out there as well. And my story, first of all, I'm Jamie. I'm 63 years old. I was born in 1959 in the Detroit area. And my mom and dad were married and back then, and tried for 8 years to have children unsuccessfully. And one of my mom's friends told her that there was this doctor in the Detroit area, Dr. Philip Peven, that could help her. He was having great success with helping women with fertility issues, to be able to go in there, and he was having great success. So my mom and dad did go to him. When he met with my mother, he tested my father a lot and said that the problem was that my father had a low sperm count, and that, that if he went home and wore loose shorts and didn't, he gave a bunch of rules. And so my mom and dad followed the rules. He stopped wearing tight clothing and wasn't riding his bike. And she said he had all sorts of things. And they went back in and they told my mom that if she had a procedure done with my father after he did all these things, that they should have success. And sure enough, I have an older sister. She was born in 1956. A few years later, my mom also wanted to have a child again, went back to the same doctor. And he told her at this point, oh, I don't think that your husband is viable anymore. We just don't feel that, I know before we had said that maybe this time we could do a procedure, but unfortunately we may need somebody to help. Now my mom was not, she wanted a baby, but anything a doctor would tell you, anything she would do. And he said, this time if he had a donor, it would help. And so my mother contacted a friend of hers. My mom and dad asked a friend who was 100% Scottish. My mother is Scottish, and she wanted her baby to be Scottish. And she had this donor come in and help her. So let's fast forward here. Years later, I'm trying to make this story brief, but years later, my mom raised my sister and I, and it came to our attention from a stepsister of mine that she had heard that my mom went to a fertility clinic, and she said, so I don't believe you are your mom's. And I'm like, well, so we approached my mom, my sister and I, and my mom told us that she went to this doctor and that my sister was my dad's, but yet when it was time for me, that she couldn't use my dad because he wasn't able to have children. So she had a friend of hers donate. And, my mom was very upset about all this. I said, Mom, it's okay. I mean, you wanted a baby and you did what you needed to do, and I understand. So some years later, I decided, because my mom told me about this donor, that he was 100% Scottish, and I had contacted this donor's family, and they welcomed me. They were lovely to me. They were so thrilled that he had helped. He had passed away, but they were thrilled that I was there and welcomed me as part of their family, and told about my Scottish background and about my donor father. So I was excited to learn about my heritage. So I did a DNA test. Now, doing this DNA test, when you do a DNA test, it opens you up to, your whole family. I wanted to know my history. I wanted to know where this donor family was from in Scotland. So I did the DNA test, and I'm sitting with my husband, and I get it back, and I looked at it, and I was like, okay, well, I'm not 100% Scottish. And my husband's like, what? And I said, no, I'm 50% Ashkenazi Jew. I'm Jewish. Yeah, and my husband looked at me, goes, what? And I was looking at it, and I'm saying, well, not only that, I'm seeing half siblings, and I'm like, what's going on here? Well, I kept looking at names on there, and I recognized one of them because the name Peven showed up. Dr. Philip Peven was my mother's OB, my mother's doctor, the doctor that my mother went to help her get pregnant with my father and with a donor. And this story evolves even further, that my sister also did a DNA test, and hers came back that she was also not my father's child. She was also the offspring of another doctor that was in the practice with Dr. Peven. And this all being said, the trust that my mom put in this doctor. So I met him. I went in person, and myself and another half sibling who also found out this devastating news. I want to stop for a minute and say, I really don't think of myself as the victim. I think of my mother as a victim and what happened to her and what she was told. This sibling that went with me to meet the doctor, her mother was told that if she went in and had a procedure, and I'm quoting, procedure done, hers, she was told, was a D&C. And if she had this D&C, that it would help her to get pregnant. So have this procedure, go back home, resume relations with your husband, and you should have a successful result. Well, she did, but that was not a D&C, as that daughter was is my sibling. So when my sibling and I went to meet with this doctor, And I told him, we told him basically, we know now that you're our biological father. And I confronted him on, my mom came in with a donor, and he said, oh yeah, I disposed of that. And I was like, you disposed of the donor. Well, yeah, I mean, I had no proof that it was viable, and we had a time, and your mom was ready, and basically I could picture my mom in stirrups waiting for a procedure, and this doctor just decides that he doesn't want to use the sample that my mom brought in. So he just willy-nilly went in the back room, did what he needed to do without my mother knowing, without her consent. And this fraud, this instance that happens to women, I wish I could say it was just, a once in a while thing, but it's not. I have siblings that were born in the 50s, like myself. I have the 60s, the 70s. I also have siblings that were born in the 80s. He did this for over, decades throughout his practice. And he's not alone. There's other doctors that have done this. And with Detroit in the area that he was doing it, which was Oak Park, it's a small area, and a very high number of Ashkenazi live in that area. Ashkenazis tend to marry, stay within their religion, and stay within a certain area. So you can just kind of think about that for a minute, the probability of what can happen. My sister went to high school with her siblings. I was living in the same area as siblings I never knew I had. It's unbelievable. The other part of all of this is to find out, I had to confront that family and everything I believed in. I had to look in the mirror and realize that, maybe I don't resemble any of my family. But worst of all, my own children, when my daughter wanted to have children and she had issues and needed to have our family history, some health issues, I honestly couldn't, tell her anything. I contacted the family and asked for my health history, and all I got is, well, he lived to be in his hundreds. That's all you really need to know. I mean, you've got great genes. Like, everybody has the right to know who their donor is, or if a woman goes in, the honesty and the trust she puts in her healthcare professional and her doctor should be there. These laws need to be in place. They're in the business of making human beings. You'd think that there would be some sort of a oversight on this. So I was just recently asked, and I believe when this was presented before, well, I can't imagine there's got to be laws in place for this. Doctors just willy-nilly going in and using themselves, or a woman going to a sperm bank and asking for, like Mr. Ross said, that the Harvard grad, aren't there laws? Well, there isn't. There's nothing in place, nothing to stop a doctor, a woman going in and saying, I want this, and a doctor going in the back room and using himself. And why are there not laws in place? Well, just until I think it was 2014 when you or I could go out and over the counter get a DNA test, or online get a DNA test. Up until then, there was no way. We didn't.
Excuse me, Ms.
connect
Hall.
ourselves
I'm
with
sorry
our
to cut
parents.
you off, but I need you to wrap it up. We are running out of time.
Okay, let me just finish with saying that the reason these laws are important now is because the fraud itself is obvious, but now we can find out who our parents are. So that's why it wasn't there before. Now these people can be caught, but not always do people my age or do DNA tests. But the fraud is out there, and we need to do something to help to control it. Some oversight, some laws in place to stop this from happening. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. The committee will go at ease.
Thank you, Vice Chair Edwards, and I thank everybody for their patience. We are back in order. We will continue discussion on these bills next week. Thank you for, again, Representative Roth, Representative Steckloff. And I will just call the committee's attention to the fact that there are glaring gaps in our current laws to address these bills. Most importantly, the statute of limitations that would allow somebody to bring a cause of action. And again, we will continue this next week. I'm going to quickly read in some cards. Mary Pollock, supporting the bills, not wishing to speak, from the Michigan National Organization for Women. Also Mary Pollock for the American Association of University Women, also supporting the bills, as well as we have a Bob Carmack who wishes to speak as neutral on the bills, and I would ask that he, for 4182, I would ask that he be able to give his testimony either via email or appear next week. And seeing no further business before this committee, we are adjourned.